Ever get that uncanny feeling online, like you're whispering something private,
Right.
but the whole internet has its ear pressed against the wall?
Oh, absolutely.
The idea of truly disappearing online feels almost, yeah, like something out of a spy movie these days, doesn't it?
It really does. I mean, in a digital world where pretty much every click, every scroll seems to leave some kind of permanent trace, the desire for genuine online anonymity, it's becoming less niche.
Yeah, less niche and more like a fundamental question.
Exactly.
And that fundamental question is precisely what we're tackling today. We're plunging into the depths of the invisible internet project, maybe better known as I2P.
I2P, right?
Think of it as like a hidden layer within the internet, specifically built for communication that resists censorship. It uses a peer-to-peer network.
In our exploration today, it's really fueled by quite an insightful safety analysis of the I2P protocol itself. It's a pretty detailed look at the mechanisms I2P uses to try and safeguard user anonymity, and also the inherent challenges it faces.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So our mission here is to kind of dissect this analysis, pull out the most important nuggets about I2P safety.
Okay.
We'll look at how it works, its strengths, the potential weaknesses, the chinks in the armor, you could say,
Right.
and ultimately what all this means for you if you're, concerned about your digital privacy and security.
Makes sense.
All right, let's jump right in then. What is I2P in its simplest form?
Okay, well, at its heart, I2P is an anonymous network. It routes your internet traffic through a volunteer network of computers,
Okay.
currently around 55,000 based on our source material.
Wow.
Its main goal is what's called bidirectional anonymity, making sure both the sender and the receiver are hard to identify.
Bidirectional.
Yeah.
Okay, so not just hiding where you are, but who you're talking to as well.
Exactly. That's a key difference. It works as an overlay network, sits on top of the regular internet, really. And it supports various anonymous things, hosting websites, they call them IP sites, secure email, private messaging, even file sharing, all within this sort of encrypted, obscured space.
Right, IP sites. Okay, so bidirectional anonymity. That's important. How does I2P actually, pull this off? How does it make things invisible? What are the core techniques?
Well, the anonymity I2P provides, it hinges on a combination of some clever techniques. First, you've got the routers.
Okay.
These are just the individual computers, the volunteers that make up the network. Each one has a router identity. Think of it as a long-term crypto ID.
Like a unique fingerprint.
Sort of, yeah. Then you have destinations. These identify the client applications, like your anonymous browser, maybe. These are essentially public key pairs. Now, the crucial thing is that communication is aimed at these keys, not at your computer's actual IP address.
Ah, okay. So that immediately hides your physical location, your IP.
Exactly.
So instead of sending a message like to my house address, it's like sending it to a locked P.O. box with a unique untraceable key.
That's a good analogy, yeah. It obscures the endpoint.
Got it. What else is going on? What other mechanics?
Next up are tunnels. These are strictly one-way pathways for data.
One way.
Yeah, unidirectional. So you have inbound tunnels for getting data and outbound tunnels for sending it.
Go ahead.
For any actual back-and-forth conversation, you need a pair of these tunnels, one in, one out.
Right, makes sense.
And what's really interesting, I think, is that these tunnels are designed to be short-lived.
How short?
Typically, they expire and get renewed every 10 minutes or so.
Only 10 minutes.
Yeah, this constant churn, this renewal, it acts as a pretty significant security measure. It limits the window for anyone trying to intercept or trace that data flow.
Wow, short-lived tunnels.
Yeah.
It's like trying to follow a path that just vanishes and reappears somewhere else every few minutes.
Exactly. Makes surveillance much harder.
That sounds like a smart way to stay hidden. Now, I've heard this term, garlic routing. It sounds, well, frankly, more like something from a cookbook.
Huh. Yeah, the name is a bit quirky, I'll give you that.
Yeah.
But the principle behind it is quite ingenious.
Okay.
Imagine taking multiple encrypted messages. Think of them as individual cloves of garlic.
Right.
You bundle them all together into a single, larger encrypted package, the garlic bulb.
Okay, the bulb.
This whole bulb is then sent across the network. Now, the key insight here is that by bundling these messages, I2P isn't just hiding the content. It's actively making it much, much harder to even track who's talking to whom and when.
Ah, because one package might have bits for different people.
Precisely. A single transmission could contain messages for several different recipients. Makes correlation incredibly difficult. It also helps resist timing analysis attacks.
Okay, so it's like sending a bunch of secret notes mixed together in one locked briefcase. and only the right person has the key for their specific note inside.
That's a pretty good way to put it, yeah.
Clever. And the encryption itself, is it just one layer or is it more complex?
Oh, it's definitely multi-layered. Thanks to that garlic routing process, I2P can use up to 4 layers of end-to-end encryption in some scenarios.
4 layers?
Yeah, and they use strong, well-vetted crypto algorithms. Things like Elgamal for public key stuff, AES-256 for the symmetric encryption, SHA-256 for hashing.
Standard strong stuff.
Right, and various digital signature algorithms too, like ED25519, ECDSA. Plus, even the direct communication between the routers themselves is encrypted at the transport layer.
So like a defense-in-depth strategy.
Exactly. Multiple layers of security.
Okay. Sounds like our data is traveling in a pretty heavily armored vehicle with lots of locked compartments inside. Now, the analysis also mentioned something called the Distributed Network Database, NetDB.
Yes, the NetDB. It's basically the network's phone book and map combined.
Okay.
It's a distributed system. It stores info about the routers on the network and also the services available, like those websites we mentioned.
Right.
It uses a distributed hash table, a DHT.
DHT. Okay.
Yeah.
Like BitTorrent uses.
Similar principle, yeah. Think of it like a library, where instead of one central card catalog, pieces of the catalog are spread across many different librarians.
Decentralized catalog.
Right. Anyone can ask any librarian for a piece of info. Makes it very resilient if one goes offline. Certain routers, called flood fill routers, have a bigger role in managing and spreading this network info.
Flood fill routers. Okay.
But, you know, the very nature of a decentralized database like this, it brings its own complexities, especially around keeping data consistent and secure. We can touch on that more when we talk vulnerabilities.
Right. Makes sense. Okay, so I2P sounds like a pretty unique approach to anonymity. How does it stack up against something people might know better, like Tor?
Yeah, that's the natural comparison, isn't it? Tor is probably the most well-known anonymity network out there.
For sure.
And while both aim to boost user privacy, their primary focus, it differs.
How so?
Tor is heavily geared towards enabling anonymous browsing of the regular internet, the clearnet, as it's often called.
Right, accessing normal websites without revealing who you are.
Exactly. It routes your traffic through its network of volunteer relays to let you do that. I2P, on the other hand, is primarily focused on facilitating secure, anonymous communication within its own network.
Okay.
And hosting those hidden services, the websites.
So Tor is more about looking out anonymously, while I2P is more about creating and interacting within its own hidden space.
That's a good way to summarize it, yeah. Their routing mechanisms are different, too. Tor uses onion routing. Your data gets wrapped in layers of encryption, like an onion. Each relay in the circuit peels off one layer, and those circuits are typically bidirectional.
Right, the onion analogy.
I2P, as we discussed, uses that garlic routing, which involves packet switching and those unidirectional tunnels.
Unidirectional tunnels and garlic loaves. Got it.
What about getting out to the regular internet? I know Tor has exit nodes for that. Does I2P have something similar?
Well, by default, I2P doesn't really operate with exit nodes like Tor does. Its core design is for that internal anonymous communication. So normally, no ClearNet access.
Not out of the box, no. You can't just fire up I2P and browse Google easily. However, I2P does offer optional out proxies.
Out proxies.
Yeah, users can configure these to access the ClearNet, but it's really important to understand when your traffic goes through an out proxy, it's leaving the protection of the I2P network.
So the anonymity kind of stops at the out proxy.
Pretty much, yeah. Your I2P anonymity doesn't extend beyond that point.
That makes sense. So Tor is designed with that peeking out capability built in, while I2P keeps you more self-contained unless you specifically choose to step out.
Right.
What about the underlying structure? You mentioned Tor's directory authorities versus I2P's NetDB.
Yeah. Tor relies on a more centralized set of directory authorities. These are trusted servers that maintain a consensus view of the network, which relays are up, things like that.
Okay. Trusted central points.
I2P, with its NetDB, is fully distributed. Like we said, there's no single central authority keeping track of everything.
So more resilient in theory. Less chance of a single point of failure or control.
Arguably, yes. That decentralization could make it more resilient. But, as we'll get into, it also introduces its own set of security considerations and potential attack vectors. Trade-offs, as always.
Always trade-offs.
Yeah.
And the size of the networks. Does that matter for anonymity?
Oh, absolutely. Tor generally has a significantly larger user base, many more users, and many more relay nodes compared to I2P's 55,000 routers.
And a bigger crowd means?
A bigger crowd means a larger anonymity set. Your traffic gets mixed in with a much larger volume of other people's traffic. Statistically, that makes it harder to isolate and identify your specific activity.
More haystacks to hide your needle in.
Exactly. But a larger, more visible network like Tor might also attract more scrutiny from, let's say, sophisticated adversaries.
Right, bigger target.
I2P's smaller, perhaps more niche community might fly under the radar a bit more in some ways. But the flip side is fewer routers mean potentially less diversity in the paths your data can take through the network.
So it's a balancing act again. Tor, bigger crowd, potentially better blending, but a bigger target. I2P, smaller crowd, maybe less attention, but also potentially less noise to hide within.
That's a good way to put it.
Now, the analysis we looked at, it highlighted some specific vulnerabilities and attacks that have hit I2P. What are some key ones we should know about?
Yeah, there have been some. One notable one that was addressed fairly recently is CVE 2023-36325.
Okay, what was that?
It affected the Java implementation of I2P, the main one. It could have potentially allowed attackers to de-anonymize EP sites.
De-anonymize? How?
It was a combination of a message replay attack and brute forcing the router set. Basically, by replaying certain messages, an attacker might have been able to link IP addresses with dropped packets, and over time, maybe infer the EP site host's real IP.
Yikes, that sounds serious.
It was potentially serious, yes. But thankfully, it was fixed in version 2.3.0. They introduced unique message IDs and separated some data stores to mitigate it.
Okay, good, it was fixed.
And it's also important to mention the C++ implementation, I2PD, wasn't affected by that specific one.
Good to know. What other kinds of attacks are a concern for I2P?
Well, denial of service, DOS attacks, they've been a recurring issue, particularly targeting those flood-fill routers we mentioned.
The ones managing the network map.
Exactly. If you can overwhelm those key nodes, you can cause connection problems, make it hard for users to build tunnels and access things.
Right.
The Dark Loris attack is one example, basically flooding a node with connections. And Sybil-assisted DDoS attacks, sometimes called Eclipse attacks.
Sybil attacks, what are those again?
A Sybil attack is where one bad actor creates tons of fake identities, fake nodes on the network.
To gain influence or just cause chaos?
Both, potentially. In I2P, they could use these Sybil nodes to help launch a DDoS attack or try to isolate users or services. That's the Eclipse part.
But I2P has defenses.
It does. The frequent tunnel rotation we talked about makes sustained attacks harder. And I2P tries to select peers based on performance, which can help filter out low-quality Sybil nodes. But a resourceful attacker might still try.
Okay, so defenses exist, but it's an ongoing battle. What about just watching the traffic? Can someone figure things out just by observing network flow? Traffic analysis.
Traffic analysis is, well, it's a potential risk for any anonymity network, really.
True.
Sophisticated adversaries, maybe state-level actors who can monitor huge chunks of the internet. They might try correlation attacks, trying to match patterns at entry and exit points, even if the data is encrypted.
Despite the tunnels and garlic riding.
It's difficult, but potentially possible with enough resources. The fact that I2P doesn't always randomize packet timing perfectly could theoretically make it vulnerable to advanced timing attacks. However, there's also an argument that I2P's built-in cover traffic. The constant background noise of encrypted data flowing, even when you're not actively doing much, might make simple traffic analysis harder for less capable observers.
So it might depend heavily on who's looking and what resources they have.
Pretty much, yeah.
And you mentioned earlier the NetDB, the distributed database, has its own potential weaknesses.
Yes. That's right. Because it relies on DHTs and those critical flood-fill riders, it's a potential target.
How so?
Well, things like flood-fill takeover, where an attacker tries to gain control of a significant number of those key flood-fill nodes.
Okay.
Or Sybil attacks aimed specifically at the data stored in the DHT. These could lead to those Eclipse attacks, making parts of the network unreachable, or potentially even helping de-anonymize users by manipulating how peer info is stored or shared.
Sounds complex to defend against.
It is. But the I2P developers are aware of these things and are actively working on countermeasures, like making it harder for brand new nodes to become flood fills, prioritizing long-standing reliable ones.
Right, building trust over time. Okay, this sounds like a constant game of cat and mouse security-wise.
It often is in this space, yeah.
Now, on a slightly more concerning note, the analysis mentioned something called I2P rat malware. That sounds bad.
Yeah, that's definitely not good. I2P rat is a real-world example of malware. RAT stands for Remote Access Trojan.
And it uses I2P?
It leverages the I2PD client, the C++1, specifically to set up encrypted command and control communication over the I2P network.
So the attackers hide their control servers within I2P.
Exactly. It lets them conceal their malicious activity, makes it way harder to trace their operations back to the source.
Wow.
It's a stark reminder that anonymity networks, while built for privacy, can unfortunately be misused by bad actors.
How does someone even get infected with something like that?
Usually the standard ways, unfortunately. Social engineering, phishing emails, tricking users into downloading and running malicious software. It exploits the user, then uses I2P for cover.
Right. A sobering reminder that the network itself might be secure, but user security is still paramount.
Yeah.
Okay. Shifting gears a bit, what about the legal side of things? Are there legal considerations someone should think about before using I2P?
Yeah, there are a few potential legal angles people should be aware of. One that often comes up is related to copyright infringement.
How does that work with an anonymous network?
Well, if you're downloading, say, a copyrighted movie over I2P using something like BitTorrent, your computer might be getting pieces of that file from various other peers on the I2P network.
Okay.
Now, even though the original source might be hidden, the IP addresses of the peers directly sending you those pieces, those might be visible because I2P itself runs on top of the regular internet, IPv4 or IPv6.
Ah, so the peer-to-peer connections within I2P might still expose IPs to each other.
Potentially, yes, to the peers you're directly connecting with for that transfer. This has led to concerns that copyright holders could, theoretically, monitor the network, join torrent swarms, and log the IP addresses of peers sharing specific files.
Okay. That sounds like a potential risk. A bit of a legal gray area.
It is somewhat complex, yeah. Another potential legal risk comes from just running the I2P router software itself.
How so? Just running it.
Because when you run I2P, your computer acts as a relay, remember? It forwards encrypted packets for other users.
Right, part of the volunteer network.
So there's a theoretical possibility, however small, that you could unknowingly be relaying packets that contain illegal content.
Even though it's encrypted and you have no idea what's inside.
Exactly. You wouldn't know the content. And you could argue you're just providing infrastructure. Many legal systems have protections for telecommunications providers, like ISPs, regarding user traffic. These might extend to I2P node operators.
Might.
It's not always legally clear-cut, and it can vary a lot depending on your country or jurisdiction. So it's a potential point of scrutiny, even if prosecution seems unlikely for just relaying encrypted traffic.
Okay, so users should definitely be cautious and just be aware of these potential legal implications, however remote they might seem.
Awareness is key, yes.
And speaking of anonymity, again, the analysis we're using makes it pretty clear. I2P isn't absolute invisibility. What are some of the built-in limitations users need to keep in mind?
That's a really crucial point. No system, I2P included, can guarantee 100% absolute invisibility forever against all possible attackers.
Right.
Determined adversaries with significant resources think state-level actors they might have capabilities we don't even know about. They could potentially de-anonymize users through very sophisticated global traffic analysis, maybe by compromising multiple routers along a tunnel path, or by finding and exploiting some unknown vulnerability.
So the determined adversary is always the caveat.
Always. And for people hosting services, like those sites, if their site goes down for a long time, and that downtime somehow correlates with a real-world event involving them, well, that could potentially offer clues, though I2P does have features to try and mitigate that specific risk.
Okay, so the main message is anonymity is more like a spectrum, a reduction of risk, not an absolute guarantee.
Exactly. It raises the bar significantly, but doesn't make you magically disappear.
And we touched on network size earlier. How does I2P's smaller user base specifically impact that anonymity level?
Well, fundamentally, a smaller network means a smaller anonymity set. Fewer users means your traffic has fewer other streams to blend in with.
Let's cover.
Potentially, yes. For a powerful global observer, this might make traffic analysis somewhat easier than in a massive network like Tor's. Though, again, that built-in cover traffic in I2P is designed to help counter this.
Right.
A smaller size can also sometimes mean slower speeds. Fewer routers available might mean less optimal paths or more load on existing ones.
Okay, so it's that trade-off again.
Yeah.
Maybe less broad attention due to size, but also a smaller crowd to hide in and potentially slower performance.
That's the essence of it.
And one last point before we get to best practices. The analysis suggested I2P can be more technically challenging to set up and use compared to, say, Tor browser bundle or just a VPN. Why is that?
Yeah, that's generally considered true. The installation process can be a bit more involved depending on your OS. And really understanding the concepts like the unidirectional tunnels, destinations, garlic routing requires a bit more technical grasp than just clicking connect on a VPN.
Hmm.
The main interface, the I2P router console you access through your browser, it's functional, but maybe not as slick or immediately intuitive for brand new users compared to some other tools.
Okay.
And this technical complexity, it's not just a barrier to entry, it also increases the risk of user error.
Misconfiguration.
Exactly. If you don't configure your browser correctly to use the I2P proxy, or if you misunderstand a setting, you could accidentally leak information or weaken your own anonymity without realizing it.
That's a really important point. Ease of use is often linked to security because it cuts down on those mistakes.
Precisely. If it's hard to use right, people are more likely to use it wrong.
Okay. So for someone who has decided, yes, I want to try I2P, I understand the risks and benefits, what are the absolute must-do best practices for using it securely?
All right, number one, absolutely critical. Only download the official I2P software from the official source, which is get-I2P.net.
Don't get it from anywhere else.
No. Avoids malware, tampered versions. Then follow the installation instructions for your specific operating system carefully.
Okay.
Once it's installed, give the I2P router time to bootstrap, to find peers, and integrate into the network. This can take a bit, maybe 10, 20 minutes, sometimes longer initially. Be patient.
Let it warm up.
Yeah, exactly. And keeping your I2P router running consistently helps you build better connections and integrate better into the network over time. Stable uptime is good.
Okay, makes sense. What about actually using it, like for browsing sites? Any specific browser advice?
Definitely. Highly recommended to use a dedicated browser just for I2P. Don't use your everyday browser.
Which one?
A privacy-focused browser like Firefox is a good choice. Or you can use the Tor browser, but, and this is crucial, you must configure it not to connect to the Tor network.
Use the browser, but disable Tor itself.
Correct. Then you need to manually set the browser's proxy settings to point to your local I2P router.
What are those settings usually?
Typically, it's HTTP proxy, 127.0.1 on port 4444. HTTPS often uses port 4445, and the SOCKS proxy might be port 44447 or sometimes 44445 as well. You might need to set both HTTP and SOCKS. Check the I2P documentation for your setup.
Okay, get the proxy settings right. Crucial.
Absolutely. And just as critical, disable JavaScript in that browser.
Disable JavaScript entirely.
Yes. And other active content like Flash, if anyone still uses WebRTC. These things can be exploited to leak your real IP address, bypassing I2P entirely.
Wow, okay. Turn off active content.
Right. Consider using browser extensions like NoScript, which gives you finer control over scripts, and uBlock Origin to block trackers and ads. That adds another layer.
Good standard privacy hygiene there. What about using a VPN with I2P? Good idea, bad idea?
It's debated. Using a reputable VPN before you launch I2P can add a layer of encryption between you and your ISP.
Hides the fact you're connecting to I2P from your ISP.
Yes, and masks your real IP from the first I2P node you connect to. That can be good.
But there's always a but.
The potential but is that routing your traffic through a VPN first might make your I2P traffic look more unique or distinctive to someone observing within the I2P network. Could create a sort of fingerprint.
Interesting trade-off.
Yeah. So if you do use a VPN, choose a trustworthy no-log provider and always connect to the VPN before you start I2P.
VPN first, then I2P. Got it.
Yeah.
What other key security tips?
Keep your I2P software updated. Developers release patches for vulnerabilities like the one we discussed. Updates are crucial.
Standard advice, always important.
Be extremely careful about sharing any personal information while using I2P. Don't link your anonymous activities to your real identity.
Obvious, but easy to forget.
Yep. Be cautious with file downloads from sites. Scan them with up-to-date antivirus software.
Okay.
For really high security needs, consider advanced setups. Using a security-focused OS like Tails or running I2P inside a virtual machine environment like Unix for better isolation.
More advanced stuff.
Yeah. Configure your I2P router to use a decent number of hops in its tunnels. Usually at least 3 is recommended. More hops makes tracing harder.
3 hops minimum.
Okay. And finally, be really wary of using those out proxies to browse the regular web. Remember, your traffic is exposed once it leaves I2P via an out proxy. It kind of defeats the purpose if you're not careful.
Right. Understand the limitations of out proxies. Okay, that's a solid list of best practices. Now imagine law enforcement or forensic analysts get hold of a computer. What kind of digital breadcrumbs might I2P leave behind? How could they detect its use?
Well, there are several potential indicators they might look for. They could find the I2P installer files, maybe check their cryptographic hashes against known good versions.
Okay, the installer itself.
They might look at digital certificates associated with the official I2P developer sites stored somewhere, check the contents of the I2P installation directory itself, config files, logs, etc.
Config files could show usage patterns.
Potentially, yes. The I2P router's address book is another place. It stores records of sites you've manually added or subscription feeds you use. That could give clues about your activity.
Your browsing history within I2P, almost.
Sort of, yeah, the sites you interact with. Also, just analyzing network traffic patterns from the computer, even if it's encrypted, might show characteristics typical of I2P traffic, consistent bandwidth use, specific port numbers being used.
So even encrypted, the pattern won't be a clue.
It could be, yes.
Okay, so the software itself leaves traces. Are there any, inherent weaknesses in I2P itself that could be exploited forensically?
Well, one area mentioned in some analyses is the decentralized nature of site registration. Some registrars, like one called no.I2P that came up, might be vulnerable if they're poorly maintained or abandoned.
How so?
An attacker, or maybe law enforcement, could theoretically try to take over an abandoned or insecure registrar. Also, the way I2P names things isn't strictly hierarchical like DNS. This could potentially allow someone to create fake or mirror versions of sites.
Fake ape sites. To trick users.
Yeah, if a user accidentally adds a fake mirror to their address book, they might interact with it, potentially revealing information. And finally, it's been pointed out that the data I2P stores locally on your hard drive might not always be strongly encrypted by default.
So physical access to the machine could reveal I2P data.
It might reveal usage data, configuration, address books, things like that, even if the network traffic was secure.
Okay, so network anonymity is the focus, but local forensics is still a potential issue. Good to know. Now, a core goal of I2P is censorship resistance. How well does it actually hold up against blocking attempts?
Well, its basic design, decentralized, peer-to-peer, end-to-end encrypted, gives it inherent strengths against censorship.
No central kill switch.
Exactly. You can't just block one server and shut down the whole network. That makes it fundamentally harder to censor than centralized services.
But the analysis suggests that it's not totally immune, right?
That's correct. Research has shown it is potentially vulnerable to address-based blocking.
Blocking the IP addresses of the routers.
Yeah. If a sensor can identify and block a large enough number of the active I2P router IPs within their territory, they could significantly disrupt connectivity for users there.
Make it hard to find peers.
Right. And similar to Tor needing its directory authorities, I2P relies on reseed servers to help new users find their first connections and join the network.
The bootstrapping problem again.
Exactly. If a sensor can block access to those reseed servers, that makes it very difficult for new users to get started. It's a potential bottleneck.
Can users get around that?
Manual reseeding is possible, finding tier info through other channels. But then a determined sensor could try to identify and block the IPs of known active I2P peers directly. Finally, really broad censorship, like blocking all encrypted or unusual-looking protocols, could potentially hit I2P traffic too, though that might cause a lot of collateral damage to other things.
So its decentralized core is strong, but the edges getting connected, the underlying IPs, those are potential weak points for sensors.
That's a good way to summarize the challenge, yeah.
Okay. Well, we have covered a ton of ground here in this deep dive. To try and wrap it all up, could you give us a concise summary, the key takeaways on I2P's safety and anonymity?
Sure. So I2P is an anonymous network built for secure peer-to-peer communication that resists censorship. Its strengths lie in robust encryption, that clever garlic routing, and the constantly changing unidirectional tunnels. These offer a significant level of anonymity within the I2P network. But it's not perfect. It's not immune to vulnerabilities like that CVE we discussed. It faces ongoing potential threats.
Yeah.
DOS attacks, Sybil attacks, sophisticated traffic analysis, and maybe attacks on its NetBB infrastructure.
Right.
Its smaller network size compared to Tor, and the fact that it's more technically demanding to set up and use correctly, those are important considerations too.
And censorship.
It has inherent advantages due to being decentralized, making it harder to block wholesale. But it's not completely invulnerable, especially to targeted IP blocking or blocking those initial reseed servers.
Okay, that's a great summary. So for our listener who's been following along, maybe intrigued by I2P for better online privacy, What's the core message they should really take away today?
I think the key takeaway is that I2P presents a really fascinating, distinct approach to online anonymity. It's got its own unique set of strengths, but also limitations. It can be a valuable tool if you need to communicate or access information within a private, encrypted network space. But, and this is the crucial part, you absolutely need a thorough understanding of how it works, its potential vulnerabilities, and the critical importance of following those security best practices we talked about.
It requires informed use.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not a magic bullet for anonymity. It's a tool that requires careful, informed, and responsible handling to be effective and safe.
This is a perfect, very nuanced summary. And it really leads me to one final thought, maybe for you, our listener, to ponder. In this constant back and forth, this arms race between anonymity tech and surveillance techniques, what does digital invisibility truly even mean today?
That's a deep question.
It is. And what role do these decentralized networks like I2P actually play in that ongoing quest? Definitely something worth thinking about. As always, we really encourage you to dig deeper into the technical details, the real-world uses and implications of these kinds of networks. Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive.